What's up, and welcome to your Path to Freedom. Thank you for dropping into another episode. This is episode 117. My guest is Troy Rainsberg. Troy's the CEO of Garage Kings. You guys know I love home service businesses, what I lovingly refer to as the dirty, unsexy service businesses. And Garage Kings is a great example of just one of these businesses. So Garage Kings is a growing franchise organization specializing in garage floor coatings, but they're also expanding their service lines to include really anything and everything someone could want to do to update their garage. So think cabinets, storage, organization, plus the flooring option. So great business in that regard. Troy and I talk about, some of the unique components of the business model and why some people find the model attractive. But what I was most interested in with this conversation was just, hearing from Troy and his background. He's a very successful entrepreneur, but Garage Kings was really his first foray into franchising. So Troy shared that he and some business partners built a very large HVAC company, but it wasn't a franchise. He got some experience dealing with private equity and ultimately ended up exiting that business, and almost through happenstance got involved with Garage Kings, ended up acquiring the brand, and now he's applying so much of what he learned building this, independent HVAC company into, a multi-million dollar business. They were doing hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue. And he also talks about some of the differences, though, as successful as his last venture was, Troy says there's been a little bit of a learning curve for him and, really understanding the dynamics of franchising and, how to build a successful franchise organization. So one of the things I really love that Troy shared is, how, as he kind of realized how steep the learning curve in building a franchise organization was, he was smart enough and didn't have an ego. He went out and found partners that were experienced in franchising and had a phenomenal track record. He partnered with a company called Franworth, and I absolutely love hearing that. I love when founders of franchise brands that, maybe don't yet have that experience of building a large national franchise, they're smart enough to realize that, and they go out and partner with people that do. When I'm coaching people, through the process of investigating franchises, if it is, a newer or more emerging concept, that's the first thing I look at. It's the first thing I suggest anyone else look at is who's the leadership team. And if they don't have prior franchise experience, were they smart enough to go and partner with someone that did? And Troy did just that. So anyway, sorry for the long-winded introduction, but a lot of good stuff that we covered in this episode. Troy's a fantastic guy. I've really enjoyed getting to know him. He's the type of guy, I could talk to him for 3 or 4 hours if we had the time. But without further ado, let's drop in with Troy Rainsberg of Garage Kings. Hey, what's up, Path to Freedom listeners? And thank you for dropping into another episode. Today, I'm joined by Troy Rainsberg. Troy is currently the CEO of Garage Kings, a growing franchise system that, as the name kind of indicates, focuses on garages, which I'll let him tell us more about exactly what they do in the garage. But Troy's someone I had the pleasure of meeting a couple months ago at a conference, and we've had a couple of really good conversations since then, and I've been excited to have him join me as a guest here on the show. So, Troy, thanks so much for being here, man.
It is such a pleasure. And I know the conversations we had, they just kept going deeper and deeper about home service franchises and home service businesses.
Yeah.
Really,
we've kind of nerded out on home service businesses and franchises a little bit. So figured might as well record it and share it with others that might be interested. So give us kind of like the real high level overview of Garage Kings. But I also want to make sure after that we back up a little bit and you have a chance to tell some of your story pre-Garage Kings, because that's a fascinating story as well. And I think we'll really give the audience some good context in terms of your experience, your leadership abilities, and kind of what you bring to the table, as an executive with Garage Kings.
I appreciate that a lot. Yeah, Garage Kings started as a residential flooring coating company.
Mm-hmm.
The brand itself just focused solely on the floors, and I bought the brand a little over 2 years ago with the intention, really, of owning the garage.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of funny how I even got into the garage business. Was I became a client first, and then you referenced my background. I had over 20 years in the HVAC business. And while I was in the HVAC business, my wife saw an ad in a magazine, actually, right?
Yeah.
Saw the picture. She's like, we should do this to our floor. And I'm like, all right, go ahead. And we picked the color out, and they came and they did it. And it was pretty interesting. They did it in a day, right? And just at that point in time, right? I'm in the HVAC business, and we had about $150 million business, and we focused on one day heating and air conditioning system installs.
Okay.
And so my whole world revolved around the sales and the operations, like the installation of these systems.
Yeah.
And I noticed that went in a day, but what I didn't expect was where my wife went with it after that. Right. So we get this floor done. My neighbors all love it. And she's like, we should paint the walls and put cabinets up. And I'm like, all right. So then she goes and gets all excited about the color, right? And she picks the paint out, and we get somebody to paint it. And then we hire a company to come out, and they put cabinets up. And now I'm starting to fall in love with the garage, like the way it's happening. But then she goes even a level higher, right? And she says, well, I'm going to take the lights down and put different lights up in the garage. And I'm thinking, we're putting fancy lights in the garage. But then, and so she does it, right? So we have 2 new lights in the garage. And then she hangs a painting up in the garage, and then she puts a TV, right? And then she's like, I don't think we should park in the garage anymore. And I was like,
it's too nice to park the car
literally. In. But I'll tell you what got me, and it's kind of funny. Like literally every time I went in that garage, it just gave me a little smile. Like it became one of my favorite rooms in the house. And so it kind of landed on my radar. And then it was probably 2 or 2.5 months later, I'm at a dinner with Home Advisor, right? We were doing a lot of marketing with Home Advisor. We had 4 or 5 locations at the time. So we were doing a lot of business with them. And the guy, he started to talk about his sons and how they were in the garage business. And I just had my floor done. I was in the process to get the cabinets and different things done. And I'm like, tell me about that. And he tells me about Garage Kings. And here he had his sons in the business. He goes, and he said the part they loved the best was how excited people were after they got the work done.
Yeah.
Here I am, I'm in it, right? I'm right in the middle of that process, and I could kind of relate to what he's talking about. And so what I did is I came home and I researched Garage Kings and learned more about the brand. Saw that they were only doing the floors, but I was like, my brother, who's in Albany, New York, I'm like, he would be good at this. And I sent him an email, linked him to the website, and said, what would you think about opening up one of these locations? And he looked at it, and he called me up within like an hour. And he's like, do you think that would be good? So I tell him at this point, he doesn't even know I'm doing it in my own garage.
Sure.
And I get to tell him about it, and he does a little research. But then now at the time he's working in the, he's like a general contractor, but more like for an industrial company. He was more like a supervisor, like on site of big projects. Right.
Okay. Yeah.
He would travel a little bit. And I knew it was bothering him. At one point he made a comment to me. He said, I feel like I rent myself out because I'm doing all this work and I'm overseeing these projects, but somebody else is the owner. Right. And I don't know why. There was something when I saw that model, because I thought he'd be good at the sales part. I thought he would understand the installation part. Right.
Yeah.
And within like 90 days, we kind of sold his wife on the whole concept. He left his job, did a home show, like went into business, and within 60 days. Now keep in mind, I'm back in my HVAC business because I'm in Philadelphia. He's in Albany, New York.
Okay.
And he gets started really quick. And in my world, right, one day installs of heater and air conditioners, and it's all about sales appointments, selling jobs, and then installing them. You get paid, and you go to the next one. Like that. That was my whole world. So I'm modeling him out the exact same way.
Yeah.
And so everything was about the marketing, getting people signed up to get estimates. We sell jobs. We get it we get it scheduled, install it, get paid, and do it again. We ends up getting like a 4 or 5 week backlog within like a month.
There you go.
Said, go get another truck, go get another grinder, let's get another crew hired, and then we're going to expand. Well, as that's happening, the owners of Garage Kings, right, the actual founders, they call me and they're like, "What are you guys doing down there?" And I'm like,
well, you guys are breaking records. What's going on?
He's like, "You're the biggest location we've gotten. You've only been in business like 90 days." He's like, what are you doing? And so one conversation led to another, and I just kind of walked him through what, like, just the way my mind thought about that.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, my brother's at 3 crews, right? And so now the wheels really starting to turn. Now, at this point, I'm still in the HVAC business.
Yeah.
Right. I've not made any kind of transition, and it would have been.
What year is this? What kind of time frame are
this would have been? I learned about Garage King in 17.
Okay.
And then my brother opened at the beginning of 18.
Okay.
So he started up in New York at the beginning of 18. By the time COVID hit, right, that's when I'd started having conversations with the founders in 19. And at that point, so back in 17, we were about 150 million at the HVAC business at 5 locations. And I didn't realize, like, literally at that time, because remember, this is not a franchise. This is just a contracting company.
Yeah.
And what I learned is how hard it is to take a system at one location and you open another location to duplicate it, right? Because everything gets further from center and it's more difficult. And then you open a third location and it gets even more difficult, right? So it's all about how strong that system is. And it was expensive trying to figure out that system, because every mistake you make costs you a lot of money.
I bet.
The people thinking about going into franchise, the beauty of it is the system's already proven. Right. And that is really what Garage Kings needs to have, right? Is to make sure we've got that system. So while this is happening, so we sold 75% of the business at the end of 17, or actually the beginning of 17, sold 75% of the business. Well, then a private equity group was who bought the 75%. So they came in and I watched them. Well, I shouldn't say watch, but I was involved in it. But it went from 150 million to 350 million in 28 months. Now, and the thing, like, you talk about learning lessons and learning how to grow, and what I learned was that they understood how to grow a business without it being painful. They knew about capacity planning. They thought longer term, right? They knew that the payoff was going to be in 12, 18, 24 months out if we made these investments right here, whether it was software, whether it was training platforms, which was another piece that we opened up training schools in each location. Like, we had full-time trainers with equipment that people could work on. And what we did is we could grow our own employees, right? Like, I think we could bring somebody in, a high school kid that maybe went to a trade school, bring him in within 4 to 6 months. I've got a full-fledged technician.
Well, right? And I bet that solves so many problems with turnover, because it's one of these businesses, I imagine, that, you got to be a little bit wary of people jumping ship for 50 cents more an hour or something like that.
And it's a challenge.
Yeah. So you were kind of grooming your
kind of building
employees. Your bench. And then they can move up in the ranks. That's brilliant.
And it's interesting because, the private equity groups taught us also that, showing the path. So people knew where the opportunities were, and really opportunities come through growth. Like, as a business grows, there's more opportunities. Well, as long as it's planned growth and you've got the capacity so that you're not taxing and stressing every person that's in the system, as long as it's planned, growth is fun. Like, literally, I remember having conversations about, like, we're doubling our revenue and we're asking each other, like, shouldn't we feel busier? But it's because it was planned well, right? Well, you can learn a lot, right? Like, just paying attention to how they do that. And, one of the things that they did is they always focused on having the right people. You got to have the right people in the right seats. I heard someone say a couple of weeks ago, have aces in their places.
Ooh, I like that.
It's just like we tell our franchisees, like, you've got to have the right people in each position, whether it's the sales position, the installers, like, whether it's a general manager, but you've got to have the right people. And it's like that for us as a franchisor.
Yeah.
We got the right people in the right place to provide the support and the resources. And that's business. Like, that's one of the challenges of business.
It's the hardest thing in any business, I believe. right? Finding and keeping good people and making sure they're in the right seats. But if you can get really good at that, to your point, you can grow, but growing doesn't necessarily mean that you're busier or, putting in that much more time. It's the definition of working smarter instead of harder, right?
That's it.
Yeah.
So I've been able to bring, so I'll go back to the story. So I watched that private equity group like orchestrate this massive growth. And I knew that at the next, what they call it, the next turn, like the next time that the business sold, I was going to roll out at that point. That was at the end of 2019. And like the whole time, now it was funny also, my brother is in business. And then me being the smart guy I am, I'm like, well, if I could do it with him, I could probably do it with other people too, right? So I ended up finding people in New Jersey, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and I ended up kind of starting my own little franchise. And I partnered with different people. And part of
you were kind of funding it.
Exactly.
They were the operator.
I was like the banker and the advisor, right? And then they would be able to be in business.
That's awesome.
They're probably people that wouldn't have done it on their own.
Yeah. Or maybe didn't have the means to begin with, but would be a great operator.
And it's funny. It's like you and I were talking earlier, like to be in business for yourself, but to not be by yourself. Like that's really what franchising is about. Right. And the irony is at the time, I still didn't really understand franchising, but I was doing that. And part of it was my brother would have never done it on his own. Right.
Yeah.
He had his own business. He was making more money than he ever made. Right. And he was on a path to create generational wealth. Right. And to help other people be able to do that, I like doing that. I wanted to help people do that. And then I could win. We could win together. Right.
Yeah. It's mutually beneficial. And that's why I like how you said you were kind of like your own franchise, because that's why franchising works in the first place, right? It's mutually beneficial.
That's right.
Franchisor, franchisee are aligned, or at least they are when it's set up correctly. And I talk to a lot of people that are in the early stages of investigating franchises, and a lot of times they kind of have this view, and I guess I can understand why if they haven't really, spent much time researching franchises, but it's like the franchisor against them. And I'm like, you're looking at this the wrong way. Like it's nothing more than a partnership, right? When it's done right, there's plenty of examples out there where, the franchisor probably was kind of working against the franchisees, but those types of systems don't last long. They implode almost always. But when it's done right, the franchisor only does well when the franchisees are doing well. That's how they continue to grow and add more franchisees. It's how they grow their revenue as the franchisor, right? The more revenue the franchisees are doing, more revenue coming into the franchisor. Like it's pretty simple in some ways, but it makes a ton of sense. There's all this mutual alignment that keeps people working towards the same goals.
Right. It's exactly right. I mean, the franchisees win first when you think about it. Like the way the model's set up, like the franchisor can never win if the franchisees didn't win first.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I didn't know those things. And so I come out of the contracting business, right? And I thought I was going to take some time off, and that took like 45 days. And they're like, all right, well, now what am I going to do? Right.
Your wife's like, get out of the house, go find something to do. You're taking up room in my beautiful garage. Get out of here.
It's funny you say that because, so I ended up buying another house. So that was my first house. I kind of fell in love with that. Well, then within 2 or 3 years, we bought another house. Well, then my next house, the garage was done completely different and like all decked out. Right.
Yeah.
And I thought about it last night. I got in from the airport last night, and I still smile when I pull in the garage, and so I love garages now. And so let me go back to how we got to that. So I ended up rolling out of the HVAC business, right? Had a great exit. Like it was, no bridges were burned. Everything was great there. And I'm still in talks subtly with the founders, right? Because they had grown the franchise to like 30 locations, and then they were. I ended up looking deeper into it and said I thought we needed to make a bigger change. I thought like the brand kind of needed to be refreshed, but we also need to add other services.
Yeah.
What I did is I did an analysis on it, ended up buying the brand. And that would have been like mid to the end of 2020.
Okay.
And I began the process, right? So we ended up redoing our brand. We redid our website, redid our whole marketing approach. Great. COVID happened right then as well.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that.
Yes. So, there were good things in COVID, and then there were bad things in COVID. We had the bad things played more along the lines of different areas being shut down for extended period of times. Like we had some states that we really struggled with that part. We also had material shortages.
Yeah.
That caused issues. And so you're kind of trying to pivot and do everything, but there's only so many ways you can do a garage floor coating and it lasts, right? So there's some key chemicals that you need to make this happen. And we're running into some problems with that.
Yeah, I bet.
Flake issues, right? Just the flakes that you put in the floor. We had at one point they stopped selling them outright. So there's a panic, just trying to find anything on the internet that we could get our hands on. So that disrupted some things. I think some of the changes that I was making disrupted some things internally, but we needed to kind of reset the foundation because I wanted to own the garage, right? I knew how my own garage made me feel, and that's what I knew people wanted to tap into. We bought the phone number 888 Garages, and with the intention again, own the garage.
Yeah.
So then we started. Now I'm probably 12 months into this, right? Putting a new CRM in place, like literally kind of restructuring everything. And I realized that I understood contracting really well, but franchising was new, right? Because everything in franchising is about the recipe. It's about the system. And as a franchisor, like I was a good business person on the contracting side, but as a franchisor, it's just different, right? And as much as I thought I understood that, right? What I learned from the private equity groups was find someone that already knows. Like you got to have people that already know what needs to happen and this is something I think any franchisee or someone looking to get into a franchise should think about, right? When someone is learning, when you're going through the learning curve of learning how to either be a business person or learning how to do a certain trade or a specific skill set, it takes time. Mm-hmm. If you're looking to grow a business and you're looking to grow a business quickly, you typically don't have time to learn as you go.
Yeah.
You got to find someone that already knows, right? So here's what I did is, and it might have even taken, I don't even think it took 12 months. Now I think it was probably 6 months. I looked for a franchise consultant, like someone that could see the back of my head to make sure I was pointing in the right direction. And if I was off track, right, we all need someone that could just see from the back of my head, am I on point or not? And I found a company called Framworth. Yeah. Okay. Now what Framworth was, they were, it's a group of people that have worked at multiple brands, but like the CEO, John Rocci, he worked for Tom Monahan directly at Domino's Pizza. He was like one of the first people at Domino's Pizza. He worked for Tom's stores himself. Like Tom mentored him. And he have been, and actually their president now, have been the CEO at Honey Baked Hams, Haagen-Dazs. Like they've got a lot of franchising background. And I hired them as a consultant. Just so I had access to them. I had a meeting a month so they could just give me advice. I would send them like financials and different information just to get feedback. And we just developed a really good relationship, right? And then I saw the track record they had with other brands that they were working on, that they were growing. And I ended up going to John Rocci within probably 14, 16 months after I bought it. And I said, can you get in the boat with me? Right? Like my thought was, if you could take what I knew about the contracting, right, and the operational piece of the business itself, and then take what he knew about the franchising piece, and how do you really grow a brand? Because my biggest fear is a franchisor. It's just like you're saying, a franchisor that doesn't have the right sound system and people buy into it, you're misleading everybody. Yeah. And I want to make sure what I've got is built. And what I was learning was everything I didn't know, when I would make a mistake, it was costing me a lot of money.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm like, I want to stop making mistakes. So if you think about a candidate looking to buy into a franchise, they're essentially paying for the experience so they don't have to go through that painful part.
Yeah. Even if, because I mean, in most cases, the mistakes that a franchisor makes, it's not like they're intentionally misleading their
Completely.
franchisees, right?
That's
It's
right.
not like, coming out of a bad place necessarily, but it happens. And I love that you brought up this piece of it. And for the audience listening, Fran Worth has a stellar reputation and track record within franchising. We'll drop a link to Fran Worth's website in the show notes so people can go check it out. They work with some amazing brands. And again, phenomenal track record. But I love that you brought this up, because this is something I talk to candidates that I work with about all the time, right? Because, there's a lot of people that at surface level look at an emerging brand, right? Less than 100 locations as inherently riskier than, a brand that's been around for a lot longer and has hundreds and hundreds of franchisees and more data to look at and all of that. But territory is very tough to find with those mature brands, right? Your growth opportunity in the future may be very limited, again, because of territory. There's a number of reasons why more emerging brands can be appealing to some people, right? So what I tell people is, look, one of the first things I look at with any emerging brand that I get introduced to, who's the founder? What's their background? Do they have a background in franchising? And if not, were they smart enough to go and partner with someone that does? Right. And when you have that, you almost get like the best of three worlds, right? You get, a founder that's got good experience and usually good industry experience, right? So you've kind of got the industry expert. If you've got someone like a Fran Worth involved that's got the franchise experience, and then you get the ability to probably look at more prime territories, get into something a little more ground floor that's going to give you the potential to build something bigger long term if that's what you want to do. Like, that's the trifecta right there, right? Whereas, like, there's plenty of brands that, the founder started franchising it, didn't really know anything about franchising, and, now it's a successful, mature franchise system today, but probably a lot more peaks and valleys on that ride, So I love that you shared that piece of the story. And I think it's a testament, to you being willing to look. Most people build a $300-some million HVAC company big enough to get on the radar of private equity. Like, they're probably going to be walking around thinking they got shit figured out and no one can tell them anything, right? Like, most people are going to have an ego that comes with that, they probably wouldn't have been so willing to, look in the mirror a little bit and say, hey, I know a lot of things. I do a lot of things well, and I think I can apply a lot of that here. But this franchising thing's a bit different than where I've come from. So let me go see who's out there that's already kind of done this piece of it and learn from them.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that, because I hadn't really thought about this. So there were three of us in the HVAC business, and we've all kind of gone into different areas since our transactions. But all of us have partnered up with other people in other facets. We've always had partner, and I think when you think about franchising, it's a partner, right?
Yeah.
That franchisor franchisee, it's the same thing. And yeah, at one point, as we were going through putting our truck program and the wrapping and everything together, the company we were working with, the gentleman, the representative we worked with, he had a big mural behind his desk, and I had asked him on a video conference, "Can you do me a favor? Can you move over?" And here it showed like a bunch of gazelles. It sounds weird that I tell the story. I asked him to move out of the way to read the back, right? But it was an African proverb, right? And it said, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And like, that resonated with me. And it was just as John Rachi and I were starting to have conversations about partnering up. And I'm like, and I go back and I think about the private equity, right? And just the way things happen. And you see these private equity groups come in because they've got the knowledge and they've got capital, right?
Yep.
And they can work with a founder, they can work with a business and grow it quickly because they already know.
Yeah.
And everybody wins in those situations. And when I thought about bringing Fran with it, I mean, they literally have helped me build the foundation. And now Garage Kings is growing like crazy. And that's what we feel really good about, So we started with floors, right? Now we've got cabinets. We're live with cabinets. We're
Love that.
piloting. We've got storage solutions, right? We're piloting two other pieces that I don't want to bring up quite yet, but like,
Fair enough.
it's just what I said. We want to own the garage. Like that's where we're going.
And why not, right? I mean, in this day and age, consumers, they want to work with a one-stop shop. Now, they don't want to work with the company probably that they feel like is jack of all trades, master of none type of thing. Right. But how much easier, if you're the homeowner, is it to work with one company that can do everything that they want done in their garage versus 3 or 4? And from what I know about the garage industry, the flooring is the most complicated piece of it. So you guys already had that down. I would imagine the other stuff was, I mean, easy is probably not the right word, but it was, not the most difficult thing to start tacking some of that stuff on. I think if you started with cabinets and storage solutions, it'd probably be a little bit harder to figure out the flooring piece of it. From what I know, the equipment's more expensive. You're dealing with, as you mentioned earlier, chemicals, and it's a whole process from what I understand.
You're exactly right. And the training, you need about 4 times more training.
Yeah.
Just the floors.
Yeah.
And it's funny we go down this road, because that was one of the fears I had coming into this, because I come from a business and a model where we were so intentional with the training platform. Every technician was trained every single week, ongoing all year round. We had training rooms in every location, and we brought this in. And what I realized with this trade is that with the floor coatings, there's no certifications, like there's no licenses that technicians have to have. There's a lot of our competition. Literally, they're painting companies that kind of do this on the side.
Yeah, they dabble in it.
No one's governing it, right? And we put together a school. So we've got a school in Dayton, Ohio, where technicians, new franchisees, they go through an intense training. They put about 15 different coatings on. They're trying different types of equipment, different type of products, different types of repair type issues that they have to go through. So literally in 7 days, we can put them out on the street installing and be revenue generating, which again, you brought up earlier, like you get on the street quick with this van-based model.
Yeah.
Which is a great thing. And we've got the training, and we figured that we're offering 117% more technical training than our top 5 competitors.
Wow.
Right? And that's my world. We used to say, you can train people before they get to your house, or you can train them at their house, right? Like which way?
Yeah, I like that.
Right?
It's so true too.
Train, right?
It's so true.
Somebody asked a question at one point. They said, so if you're going to invest all that time and all that money in training your people, what happens if they leave? And the other side of it is, if you don't train your people, like what happens if they stay?
Yeah.
Right. Like so you got to make the investment. Like
I think I was having this conversation with the GM for one of our businesses the other day, and this is an insulation business, and we've had some challenges with turnover and stuff recently. It hasn't been that bad up until recently, but it's guys leaving because they can make a little bit more money somewhere else. And my GM's of the opinion that, hey, if we don't throw more money at these guys, they're going to leave. And I'm of the opinion that, hey, if they're going to leave because they get offered a little bit more money, like they can go ahead and go. And exactly. What we need to do, because if we give them a little bit more money today, that may keep them here for 3 or 4 more months, but there's no loyalty there, right? Like, and it's also just creating a bad culture, right? Where they feel like every time they start, whining a little bit about their pay, we're just going to fork over more money. Like, that's a slippery slope. So, but it led into this conversation of like, look, more money is not always the only reason that someone decides to stay with a company or to leave a company, right? And I think if they feel like they're getting continued education and additional training, like that might be enough for someone to stay, even if they could leave and make a little bit more somewhere else. If they feel like the company's investing in them as a person, and actually cares, that kind of cultural piece, I think
exactly right.
carries a lot more value than a lot of people would initially think. It's not just about the compensation. So, I mean, what a good example of, where you were able to bring your experience from the HVAC company and apply it over here.
Yeah.
Because I want to take 1 second. If you're listening to this podcast, then there's a good chance that you're looking to create more freedom in your own life. There's also a good chance that you realize that owning your own business can be a great way to take more control of your livelihood and create more of that freedom that we're all looking for. Also, if you've been listening to the show for a while, you realize that I specialize in franchise ownership. In addition to owning franchise businesses myself, I have a franchise consulting firm, Path to Freedom, where I help people navigate what is typically an overwhelming process of understanding franchising, identifying specific franchise companies that could be a fit, and then conducting the due diligence in a thorough and efficient manner with those franchise brands. My whole purpose here is to leverage my experience working for franchisors, owning franchises myself, and how we've been able to use that to create more freedom in our lives and help you determine if that could be a path that makes sense for you as well. So if any of this sounds interesting, if you've considered business ownership in the past, whether you've explored franchising specifically or not, I'd love to connect with you. I'd love to learn more about you and what it is that you're working towards in your life and determine if I may be in a position to help. A great starting point is the link below in the show notes, which will take you to a short form to fill out, and you'll receive a free copy of an ebook that I've put together, The 7 Steps to Freedom Through Franchise Ownership. That'll also get us connected, and I'd love to set up an introductory call where I can explain a little bit more about the process that I use to help people determine if franchise ownership could be a great way to start charting their own path to freedom. So click the link below in the show notes, receive the ebook, and let's get connected. I'd love to hear from you. And just make sure the audience understands, because it sounds like your HVAC company was really just regional. Is that accurate? You said 5 or 6 locations?
It started. We literally had 4 locations we have one in Pennsylvania, right down near Philadelphia. And then we went across the bridge into New Jersey. We have one in Delaware. It really started in Delaware, and then we bought one in Baltimore, Maryland. So they were all in a region there.
So not a national company.
Exactly. And then we expanded and bought one up in Connecticut.
Okay.
And so we had 5 locations. That was a stretch for us because we had to take a plane to get there, right? So it was a bit of a different model. But the owner stayed, right? And we bought 75% of his business, and he stayed, and he's still with them today, and just even through a couple of different transactions. But what we learned is, so we had started in Baltimore from scratch and grew it, and it was hard. Like, it was painful because it was a different actual market, MSA. It was a different market, so we had no name recognition down there, right? Versus the other one. And then when we bought, and we kind of greenfielded that one, and it took us a while. It took years to get that one up and running. We bought the one in Connecticut, 75%, and we could overlay the operations quickly, and it made an impact right away. And we learned it was better to buy someone and then fix it.
Yeah.
And then that's kind of how we sold it to the private equity group. So then we went from 5 locations. When they bought us, 28 months later, it was they had done 18 acquisitions, and then we had 12 locations because they would tuck them in, a lot of times leaving the name brands right where they were. But you saw how the recipe, because we would take the operational model and use the same model at that location. We would buy a business and put our model over top of it, and you could see the change instantly. And it's like franchising, right? So we've got the model built. We've got a guy that just opened up in Northern Atlanta. He literally took him about 9 weeks to go from signing to actually opening his business. He opens his business, and he had 15 appointments already on his schedule to give estimates. He sold 4 of the first 5, did his first install. I think he opened his business on Thursday, did his first install on Monday. And now he's in business, right?
Like, now he's in business, and he's got cash flow. He's got cash coming through. So let's use that as a segue to really kind of dissect the business model a little bit, from a prospective franchisee's eyes. couple things that I'll just say right off the bat that I love about this type of model. One, you just hit the nail on the head, is cash flow.
Yes.
Right. I'm assuming, tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming this is pretty similar to our custom shelving business where, like we don't have to carry a ton of inventory, really none at all. We order as needed. And in that business, everything's built like to the millimeter custom. And so we take a deposit when we sell the job, right? We don't order any materials until we have a deposit. For us, it's usually a 50% deposit unless they're leveraging one of our financing options. And then we get paid the day we do the work. So from a cash flow standpoint, it's beautiful. And then I can compare that to my insulation business where we do a lot of work with home builders. And they want to pay you 30 days, which in reality turns into 45, pushing 60 days. I've never heard, Troy, I've never heard the phrase checks in the mail so many times until we started working with home builders. Man, it's the most frustrating thing in the world, and that business doesn't cash flow for shit. So I really have an appreciation for a business with really strong cash flow, and it seems like Garage Kings is very similar in that regard.
You're exactly right. We want our new franchisees they start with about 6 weeks worth of actual product inventory, right? With the intention of when you sell a job, we want to make sure you've got the product and you can install it as soon as you need to. Right. Yep. The homeowner wants that. Like that's ideally where we want you to be. And then we have free shipping on anything over $4,000 when they order product, right? We want them to order weekly to keep everything replenished. So there's never an issue with being able to do an install. The install truck is where my HVAC background comes in. The install truck's the asset, right? You've got to have the truck at an install. And our target is to do 1-day installs. Some of them are 2, depending. We offer 3 different floor types. Depending on which one the homeowner buys, it's either a 1-day install or a 2-day install for the coatings.
Some take a longer to dry, right, or to set.
They do actually. We've got you can do a 3-layer floor, a 4-layer floor, or a 6-layer floor. The 6-layer floor takes 2 days. Right?
Yeah,
you know that going in, it's probably the best one you could put in on the market, right? Your cabinets are either going to be a half-day install, full-day install, or a day and a half, depending on what package they buy. And so it's a pretty simple model on that part. We don't stock the cabinets. Those are to you within 5 days. And those installs, you want to have the cabinet install done after the floor, right? You can't do that part before the floor.
Makes sense. Yeah.
So it's a pretty simple, it's a pretty simple model, right? But the cash flow piece is exactly what you said. You can take a deposit up front. So now you've got money in the bank.
Yep.
You've already got your product. That's part of the upfront, your item 7 that you're picking up at the beginning, right? You've already got your product. You're ready to install, and you get a check at the end.
Yep.
Right.
It's beautiful.
And tomorrow, we'll do the same thing.
Well, and like you mentioned earlier with that example of your North Atlanta franchisee, like this is the type of business that you can realistically get up and running very quickly, from the time you decide to become a franchisee and make that official. Whereas so many other franchises, if there's, a storefront involved, you're talking probably minimum 9 months, a lot of times 12, just to get to that point where your doors are open and you're generating some revenue. And a lot of people are fine with that. And there's plenty of great, brick and mortar franchise concepts out there, but this is something that's worth noting, the speed to open. And the other thing, you don't have to, share an exact number. I'm sure you give some sort of an average in your FDD, but I would imagine this is a pretty high average ticket business too, which combine that with the speed to open and the cash flow, like that's the recipe for a quick ramp up business. And you shared some examples of, how quickly your brother was able to ramp his business up. But I mean, think about it. If your average ticket's around, say, $5,000, which I would imagine you're in that kind of ballpark, you only need to sell like 5 or 6 jobs in your first month in business to have, 30,000 plus in revenue.
You're exactly right.
Like, how many businesses are you going to open up month 1 and do like 30K? And obviously there's no guarantees with any of this, right? Like you got to be able to convert the estimates to sales, right? Like there is a sales component here. It's not going to fall in your lap, but that's probably not crazy unrealistic in a business like Garage Kings. I know with Shelf Genie, which we've talked at length, kind of how similar those two businesses are. Like that's kind of like average for a first month franchisee. If they do, 30K or so, that's like, it's a pretty good start, but they're not breaking records or turning too many heads at that level.
You're spot on with the numbers. You're spot on. And we're seeing that's gone up even more since the cabinets.
Oh, I bet. Yeah. Right? Yeah.
Actually, the cabinets, just a cabinet sale is close to double what a floor sale is, right? That's what we're seeing.
Really?
With the storage. Okay. Tell you what we're seeing is the overhead storage, like where it hangs down from the ceiling and you can hide stuff, right? People really like that.
I live in a coastal area, so we see it all the time where people want to hang like kayaks and fishing rods and all types of stuff. We're getting ready to build a new house. We're starting to clear the lot next week, and working through everything with our builder. I want to say we allocated like 15,000 for the garage for like the flooring, the cabinets, the storage solutions, because I wanted to make sure like we just went ahead and did it all up front, and I want to do it to the max, man. Like I want to smile when I drive into my garage like you do.
It's funny because we had a meeting this week with our owners, and one of the things we were talking about were sales, or the salespeople, and I told them, like, the question you really need to ask your homeowners is, what would your garage need to look like? Like, just picture what it would look like if every time you pulled into it, you just got a little smile.
Yeah.
And if you could start with that, and then let's see if we can meet it with everything that we're offering, because odds are we can, and it's one of my favorite rooms in my house, the garage I've got now.
Yeah. And I imagine it's the type of thing. Yeah. I imagine it's the type of thing that, you've got so many different options, right? So you can really work with your customers to understand, like the question you posed to your owners, like, what would your dream garage look like? And then you can design that for them, right? And so that's a more consultative approach to sales than a lot of type of sales, right? And I would imagine too, this will kind of tie into dissecting the business model a little bit, but you guys are leveraging good outbound marketing and advertising and things like home shows as well. That's generating a lot of inbound leads. I know you guys have a call center that's really there to take those leads and convert them to estimates on the franchisees' calendars, which is, in this type of business, guys, if you're listening, don't even mess with it if there's not a call center. I promise that's nothing but headaches if you have to try to deal with it yourself. Like, I'm so glad we don't have to worry about that in our businesses, especially if it is really, leveraging smart outbound marketing. You're going to have probably a significant volume of inbound leads, which is what you want, but that's a lot, if you as the owner are tied to your phone all day trying to take those calls. So, your sales appointments are warm, right? These are people that, they saw an ad or whatever, but they proactively reached out to you, invited you into their home.
That's right.
Like, what more of a warm sales, environment are you going to find than that? And it's something that's fun. It's something that people get excited about, right? Like, I imagine that's a big difference from your HVAC days, right? Where people are pissed if they have to call the HVAC company. They're like, God damn it, the AC went out again. Whereas, like, this is something fun. Maybe they've been talking about it or thinking about it for a while. We see that with our shelving business, and then it's the exact opposite with insulation. Like, nobody cares. You have to have the insulation, but you're not like excited, when you have to call the insulation company to come out,
100% right.
So
100%.
Let's talk about staffing quickly. I know you talked a little bit about training, which I love. So, like, how many employees does a franchisee kind of need to start? Are you guys recommending W-2 employees over 1099, or what does that kind of look like?
Great question. So coming out of the gate with a one truck model, you're looking at, and some of it depends on what role the owner wants to play, right?
Yep.
Because you can do an investor model on
Yep.
this.
Yep.
I think home service, you and I talk a little bit, home service models are a little more difficult. If you're looking to do a hands-off type model, it takes a good manager to run it.
Yep.
Initially out of the gate, you need a salesperson and at least 2 installers.
Okay.
Right? So really you can do 3. And if the owner plays one of those roles, that's where your cash flow and profits are going to come the quickest. Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you're an investor, right? If you're an investor and you're hiring those people, it's still an option. You can still get that ball rolling, right? As you grow. And this is one of the great things about this is that depending on how big someone wants to make their business, their input more with the marketing and how much they're willing to put in quickly, right? You can grow really fast. Like we've had locations, I don't know what to say is we've had locations hit almost $1 million year one. Right?
Yeah.
They were intentional up front with their marketing spend to drive the business. But then it's execution, right? It literally, because you got to get it off the ground, right? And then it's about execution. And once you get that wheel turning, this is, and it's funny you say like how this is a fun thing to sell. It's a fun installation to deliver because people love it, right?
Yeah.
And what happens is that sells, right? So before and after pictures sell. Like the visual side of this, my mother-in-law's water heater broke, right? I'm not going to talk to a lot of people about the new water heater we're putting.
Like, yo, you got to come check out the new water heater I got put in. Like, no. Well, and if it does, it comes up as a negative. You're like, guess what I had to deal with last week? Fucking water heater went out,
That's exactly right. And this is fun. Like people love showing off.
Oh, yeah.
What that garage looks like. Well, then that sells. Literally, our top 3 locations, all 3 averaged 25% of the jobs they sold were referrals.
I believe it.
From someone else referring them. Right?
I bet your installers, across the system, I would guess like almost 1 out of every 4 jobs, the customer's bringing someone over to look at it before they're even done and out of the garage.
I talked to an owner in Philadelphia this week, and he said he sold 2 jobs during the same install with people just coming up to see what the neighbor was doing.
Yeah.
And then he went over and saw them afterwards and sold their floors.
We had that with our Shelf Genie business at least once last week. And I want to say even a second time, because as people are pumped about it, they're like, yo, come check this out. And then like, if your salesperson's on top of it, right, and they're interested, like, well, I can come over and look right now. It's like capitalize on that. So yeah, it's a fun business for sure. Let's talk a little bit more about the role of the owner, right? Because this is something that you and I talked about, kind of before we started recording. Look, any of these businesses can be started as an investor model, executive model. I think a lot of it depends on the owner and their skill set, right? How good are they at managing people and building teams and setting the right tone? What are you guys really looking for in your franchisees? Like what's the ideal franchisee for you? I'm assuming you don't care so much if they have like garage experience or home improvement experience, right?
Here's the paths that we see. We see operators, meaning technically oriented or mechanically inclined individuals, male, female, either way, that want to work really in the field. Okay. So if they want to be an installer, they can be in that first crew. They could be, when you go to your second truck and you have 2 crews, you hire a 5th person. We see some of them be that 5th person that either helps on the bigger installs or fills in if somebody calls out sick.
Yeah, floater
kind of plug it, right?
Yeah.
And then what they do is they hire a salesperson, right? So you've got a full-time salesperson, whether you're running 1 truck or 2 trucks. When you go to a 3rd truck, it changes a little bit. We've got owners, we've got 3 or 4 owners right now that are running more than 3 trucks. And at that point, they're really in a management role where they've got like an install supervisor, and then they've got multiple salespeople, and then everybody's reporting to them. Or they have a GM, right? So we've got one gentleman that's got locations on both sides of the country with a GM at each location, and then he just oversees and the GMs report to him. So depending again where the owner wants to get to, and we can help with the guidance, right, of what that looks like. They can play multiple different roles, but as it grows, if that's what they want, some of our happiest franchisees love being that operator, being in the truck and doing the installs, and they got a salesperson.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's kind of where you want to, like what you want to get. It can work that way.
Yeah. Love that. Tell me one of your favorite stories. This kind of, put you on the spot a little bit, but what's one of your favorite stories about one of your franchisees to date? It could be just like a funny story or like a really cool accomplishment. You've already shared a couple of good stories, but I think these types of stories resonate with people listening. So actually, whatever comes to mind right off the bat.
The first one that comes to mind is, for me, it's like the epitome of what franchising can be, right? We've got a gentleman, he was a school teacher that had been in the public school system for more than 20 years. How he got to Garage Kings, I still don't actually know how he got there, but he ends up coming on board with Garage Kings, opens up a business. He runs one of the best locations we have. He was the first one to get to 100 reviews, right? He is very methodical in kind of the work that he takes on. He's involved with the installations. He also can help with the sales. But like he knows where he's good, like kind of what his unique abilities are. But he makes more money than he's ever made. He's running his own business. He loves what he delivers.
Yeah.
And he's like the epitome of the perfect franchisee. And he stays in his lane.
Yeah.
And I love seeing people. It's like the perfect combination in all different respects. And if you were to see him 5 or 6 years ago, before he made that transition, and he was a school teacher, you've been like, I don't see that happening. And it's been great.
Yeah.
I love those kinds of stories.
That's a great story, because I think, for the franchisor, right, it's your job to, kind of be the gatekeeper of who you're awarding franchises to, right? I mean, the really good brands out there aren't just selling to anyone that may be willing to write them a check, right? There's a process, and that process is two-sided, right? It's about the candidate getting the information they need, but it's also about you guys as the franchisor getting to know them. And so I think that's a good lesson for franchisors, right? Don't judge a book by its cover, and don't necessarily say, oh, well, this guy's background has nothing to do with this business. Like how could that translate? And good testament to franchising when it's done right too. If you follow the system, chances are you'll be successful. Doesn't mean it'll be, completely smooth sailing to get there, but if you follow the system, you'll probably be successful.
Doesn't mean it's going to be easy.
No,
right? No. Work.
No.
But the risk is so much less when you follow the system, because it's already proven.
I'll give you, I was asked to be a guest on someone's podcast recently, and they were, asking me kind of what are traits that you've seen that separate really successful franchisees from, franchisees that are average or maybe underperforming, right? And this is an analogy that I got from a mentor of mine in franchising. He was the CEO of the first franchise brand that I went to work for. And when they had candidates come into Discovery Day, he would use this analogy, right? It is because I think that's a misconception, right? That people think, oh, I'm buying a franchise, therefore in 12 months, I should have a profitable business that kind of materializes in front of me, right? That's obviously not going to happen. Like, you got to put in the work. So anyways, this analogy was, if you think about a bicycle, right? It is the franchisor's job to build the bike. And just like in franchising, if you're shopping for a bike, there's all different types of bikes you get. Racing bike, mountain bike, beach cruiser, like depending on what you're looking to get out of the bike, there's different options, right? And you should probably, try to select a bike that's best suited for what you're trying to accomplish with a bike, right? It's the franchisor's job to build the best bike that they can. make sure it's sturdy, make sure it's made out of good materials, got all the bells and whistles, et cetera. I don't know a ton about bikes, so that's kind of as far as I can take that piece of the analogy. But, the point is, it doesn't matter how good the bike is, right? It could be the best damn bike the world's ever seen. That bike goes nowhere unless someone gets on and pedals it, right? So that's the franchisee's job, is to get on the bike and pedal it. And so you can kind of lackadaisical pedal, or you can get on and you can pedal your ass off, right? You get on and pedal your ass off, especially if it's a good bike, you're going to go fast. You're going to probably go further than the franchisees that are just, pedaling enough to stay up and not fall over. It's a great analogy. I take zero credit for that.
We can't pedal your bike. I like that.
That's right. Yeah. It's not your job as the franchisor to pedal the bike. It's the franchisee's job. So that's the work, right? That's the work. And, I've got a daughter that I'm trying to teach how to ride the bike. So I could keep taking this. Maybe I'll have to think on this a little bit, but you start with training wheels, then you get to the point where the training wheels come off and you're probably a little wobbly, but the more time, energy, and effort you put into it, the more comfortable you get on the bike. And so, yeah, it's a good analogy. I take zero credit for that, but I think it's a perfect way to look at it, because it's not necessarily this big easy button that you're hitting just to buy a franchise. I mean, in some ways, you're choosing to work smarter instead of harder, right? Because you pointed this out earlier. Franchisors got the experience, right? They've already made a lot of the mistakes that now you could likely avoid as the franchisee if you listen and follow the system. But there's no replacement for hard work.
It's interesting the way you brought that up about the bike too, because it just like some conversations I had earlier this week, there's people that want to go into business for themselves. Yeah. I know. They've got to build their own bike. Right. So now you got to build the bike and ride it.
Yeah.
And that's different than you think it's going to be.
Can you imagine trying to build a bike if you've never done that before? Where do you get the materials from? Where do you even start? What piece of the bike needs to come together first? That's a good, analogy in itself, because I was telling you a story, and I guess if you've got a few minutes, I can tell it here. But, speaking of garages, my wife and I decided we wanted to get into the garage business. This was 2020. It was, around COVID, kind of coming onto the scene. And, because our shelving customers would always ask us, what could we do in the garage? And we didn't have anything. And, but we were a little bit cocky. We kind of went against what I preach all the time, what you and I have been talking about today, right? The value of franchising when it's done right. And so anyways, we went looking at garage dealerships, and we weren't so much looking to do the floors. Ours was more the storage and the organization, because that tied in pretty closely to Shelf Genie. And to make the story short, we wasted at least 8 or 9 months trying to, find the right dealer, figure out pricing, figure out branding, figure out a website, figure out marketing materials. How are we going to deliver estimates? We wanted to be able to do 3D drawings like we do in our Shelf Genie business, but we wanted our pricing to tie into that. Like, we took for granted how turnkey Shelf Genie was, in terms of just all the different pieces that are there that allow us to run the process that we run. That's a great experience for the client. It kind of streamlines the business for us as owners. And, man, if we would have because the motivation to do it that way versus getting into a franchise was save the franchise fees, right? If we would have just paid the damn franchise fees to a good franchise in the garage space, I didn't know about Garage Kings at this time, but man, we would have been open in 3 months and we'd probably have a very successful garage business today, versus we got like 9 months into it, kind of got distracted by some other things, got pregnant again, and that thing's still sitting on the back burner. We haven't touched it in 2 years. never ran a sales appointment, never generated $1 in revenue. And, you know, we thought we knew how to.
There's a cost. Like there's a cost to that because there's a lot of lost opportunity, right?
Lost opportunity, lost time. You know, we certainly put some money into it. You know, it wasn't a significant amount of actual money that we shelled out, but definitely opportunity cost, you know. Absolutely.
I'll tell you what, you know, I didn't come from a franchising background. Like I spent 25 years at just the home services trades, we'll say, right? I am more of a franchising fan now than ever. And I'll attribute some of this back to you because some of the conversations you and I had at that conference 2 months ago made me start to look and then seeing all the different brands and how, I guess, how much a franchising system reduces risk.
Yeah.
And because you're paying it one way or another, and odds are because you're trying to build the bike, right? And every time you put the parts on wrong, it's the part they don't tell you. Every time you put the parts on wrong, it costs you money.
Right? That's right.
That's what business is.
And you may fall and hurt yourself a little bit too, right?
And there's a cost to the time. I love what you said about the time too, right? Because if
had
you just pulled the trigger and got into a franchise, then it's profitable. Right now.
We'd be like 3 years into, I'm sure it would be a 7-figure business at this point, you know.
Then you'd be buying a different one, right?
Yeah.
Because
so it was a great lesson for us, and you know, definitely a little dose of humility. We thought we knew how to build the bike, and you know, look, I'm sure if we would have said, "Hey, let's make this priority number one," we could have figured it out. But why? Like, why go through, especially if you have other things going on, right? We had a couple of other businesses at the time, and you know, it doesn't make sense to completely take your eye off the ball of those. You know, we got kids, we got a life. Like, why go through the pain of trying to figure out how to build your own bike when you can go buy a fantastic bike from someone else, and then you get straight to the fun part, which is pedaling it and riding it, you know?
It's funny because if you've got candidates that are thinking about doing something on their own, like my advice would be do a franchise first and learn how the bike was built, right?
Yeah.
Learn how the bike was built and make some money while you're learning.
Right.
Sell it and then go do one on your own. Like you're not going to want to do that anyway, but just do it that way because
when people do it all the time, people buy and sell franchises all the time. You talk about private equity, like private equity's been buying franchise brands for years now, but they're getting even more interested in buying out franchisees. You know, franchisees that have built a nice business in some cases are getting on private equity's radar. And you want to talk about life-changing generational wealth,
right.
But exactly, you know, it's one of the reasons I kind of spotlighted, you know, how impressive it is to me that you and your partners built your HVAC business to the point where it got on private equity's radar. You know, to my understanding, that's pretty difficult to do with a regional business. I mean, clearly you guys were very successful, and that's why, you know, you ended up on a private equity firm's radar. But I guess the point I'm getting at is I think it's easier to do that with a franchise because private equity sees the value in the brand and, you know, the larger system and all of that. So, but yeah, it's fascinating, man. It's such a fascinating world of franchising. And, you know, we were talking, you go to these conferences, you meet so many people, you get to see all these different businesses and brands. And there's so many ways that you can go about growing and building your own empire, whether that's through multiple brands, through scaling with one brand, you know, through learning enough through franchising and using that as a platform to go build something entirely on your own. You know, there's just so many avenues. And I love meeting people like you and nerding out on this type of stuff. So Troy, really appreciate you coming on the show. And we'll drop a link to the Garage Kings website in the show notes, so people can go check it out. Where can people connect with you if they want to hear more? Is LinkedIn a good place to find you, or where's
LinkedIn is great. Troy.Rainsberg at garagekings.com. They can email me.
Boom. All right. We'll put it all in the show notes. But hey, man, love what you guys are doing with Garage Kings. Keep up the good work, and really appreciate you dropping in here on the Path to Freedom podcast.
True pleasure. Thank you, Wes.
Got it.